What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Ableton Music Producer Podcast. This is Dan Giffen, as always. Today, we have a special guest who goes by the producer name Kill Paris. His name is Corey Baker. He is a multi-instrumentalist, a electro-funk producer. He's collaborated with a lot of artists that I really love, including Big Gigantic, Griz, Gramatik, Dillon Francis, Illenium, Zedd. We could go on and on about his creds. He teaches at funthingsfunlife.com as an Ableton Certified Trainer, and he has a really cool chihuahua. Today's episode's really great. We talk a lot about Kill Paris's workflows using UAD plugins. We talk about sidechaining, his favorite effects, how he uses them. He talks a lot about how to stay in a good headspace while producing, the whole mental aspect of being a creative producer, what that looks like for him. Before we jump into that, if you haven't hit that subscribe button or left a review wherever you're listening to the podcast, whether it's Apple Podcast, wherever, please do that. It would really help me out. I'd really appreciate it. Also, if you want to be the first person to know when new episodes come out and get some new tips and tricks in Ableton Live, join the newsletter and go to liveproducersonline.com/newsletter. Be happy to send you some stuff, and I promise I won't spam you to the best of my ability. Also, if you're on Discord, join my private Discord group. Go to liveproducersonline.com/Discord. You'll be able to hang out with me. I'm sharing new tips and tricks producing in Ableton Live in there, and a lot of other producers are hanging out. So join us on the other side. Would love to see you there. Also, if you don't own Ableton Live, I am a reseller, so I'd be happy to hook you up with a discount. Go to liveproducersonline.com/buyableton. Happy to hook you up. Also want to give a huge shout out to our amazing sponsors making these episodes possible. So a huge shout out to Audient. If you're in the market for buying a new audio interface, definitely check out Audient. They have become a key player within the recording world, boosting a competitive range of studio essentials. They have recently released their new generation of the popular ID audio interfaces, the ID4 and the ID14 MKII. They have really great Audient Console Mic Preamps, pristine converters, and offer incredible audio performance in a solid compact little box. So check them out. Definitely go to audient.com/AMP podcast. That's Audient, AUDIENT.com/AMP podcast. And it's definitely worth looking up. If you haven't heard about Melodics, you guys definitely should check them out. If you haven't joined, there's a free trial. It's a fun desktop app that you can download and gamify your practicing. It's a great way to step up your skills practicing in the studio with a MIDI controller. Maybe you want to step up your scales or music theory, finger drumming, or if you're a drummer, then plug in your electric drum kit and check out their large lesson variety where you can grow your skills producing and practicing, and while having fun doing it, because music should be fun. So definitely check that out. Go to melodics.com. You can save 20% off of their subscription, which gives you access to a ton of more lessons and options. So go to melodics.com, sign up for the subscription, save 20% with the discount code LPO-20. That's LPO-20. And save that money. So thanks to Melodics and Audient for sponsoring this episode. And without wasting any more time, let's jump into today's podcast with Kill Paris. How's Squirt doing?
Squid, you mean?
Or Squid, I'm sorry. Yeah, how's Squid, your dog? Squirt, I just said.
No, he's good. He's good.
Yeah, he's a little chihuahua, right?
Yeah, chihuahua something. I think we're going to get a DNA test soon to figure out what he really is, because he's got some other stuff going on. I don't know. Yeah.
I find mixed breed dogs are like the best dogs sometimes. Like their genetics are great too. They live longer, typically.
Yeah.
Where did you get him?
It was like this, like sort of like rescue / like farm that was out in, I think Sheridan, Colorado, which is about like half an hour, 40 minutes from here, kind of out in the boondocks. So we have a third dog now. So
I feel like every studio needs some kind of pet, like whether it's like a dog. My friend Gardner has like a cockatoo that like sings with him while he makes music. Awesome. I've got a bunch of like stuffed animals around here. I don't really know why, but like having some kind of studio pet, I feel like is essential.
Yeah. And I guess I'd never thought of this before, but it can be a good like way to force yourself to take breaks.
Yeah.
Also, they're sometimes a distraction depending on what's going on.
That's true. Yeah, you don't want him to pee on the studio floor. That's not good. It's a good break. Go on a walk. Cool, man. Well, for anybody listening right now, we're hanging out with Corey Baker, aka Kill Paris. If you aren't already familiar, definitely check out his music. But Corey is a multi-instrumentalist. He's an electro funk producer. He's also an Ableton certified trainer, shout out. And he's based in Denver, Colorado. His Kill Paris project has allowed him to tour and collaborate with a lot of established artists, a lot of my favorite artists as well, including Griz, Illenium, Gramatik, Dillon Francis, Zedd, Big G, a lot of others. But yeah, dude, thanks for joining the podcast. It's good to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. I love hanging out with other Ableton certified trainers. I feel like the Ableton family is like pretty small in that circle.
Yeah, and it's a bunch of nerds too, like super Ableton ninjas who are constantly like calculating chains and you know, like all kinds of weird stuff.
Yeah, for real. It's a black hole, man. I'm into it. The Facebook group for certified trainers is like my number one reason for being on Facebook too, because there's always stuff to learn. People are posting in there too. Yeah. Anyway, like for people who maybe don't know you, I'd love to learn a little bit more about how you got started making music. You just said that you're also from Indiana, back in your roots, which is where I'm based right now in Indianapolis. But how did you get started in music, and like where did that lead you to the wonderful world of Ableton?
Yeah, somewhere along the lines when I was growing up, like when I was probably like 10 or 11, I got really interested in the guitar. And I think I got a guitar for like might have been like my 15th birthday or something. I had this really crappy like harmony guitar that I got from JCPenney. And that was like the only option. Like I saved up a bunch of money, which wasn't a bunch of money. It was like $50, but at the time it was a bunch of money. And there's this really vivid memory actually, because the guitar was so terrible. And I was like, man, I don't know if I want to do this. And my friend Brian at the time, was like, no, dude, just like stick with it. And I was like, okay, like I'll keep it, whatever. And I think for my 16th birthday, my dad got me this. It was like one of the Squier like starter guitars, you know, but it was off-white, like Jimi Hendrix's guitar. And I like loved Jimi Hendrix like growing up. Like that was like the guy that like kind of got me into guitar. So started playing guitar, played in some bands. You know, back then I had this crappy like, I don't know, it might have been Windows XP at the time.
Classic.
Yeah, and I had like a torrented version of Acid Pro and would like spend, you know, like 2 days of like connecting, because it was dial-up internet. So like connecting to the internet and then trying to download like these, you know, like they were like acid loop packs. And I don't know if that's what they called them. There was some like weird name for them, but they were basically like sample packs of just like drums and stuff that I could like throw in and kind of like jam over. And I really had no way to record, but I was really interested in that stuff. Yeah, I played guitar in bands throughout high school, and like my parents wanted me to go to college, and I was like, well, I don't want to go to college for like anything like stupid.
Right.
I want to go and like do music like somehow. And at that time there was like Full Sail was a thing, and I went and saw that campus, but they didn't offer like a bachelor's degree at the time. And my parents were like, you have to get a bachelor's degree if we're helping you out with college, like you have to get a bachelor's degree. So I went to this other school, which was in Tampa, and they had a bachelor's degree, and it was in recording arts. I did that, but at that school, like we learned Pro Tools and Cubase, like Reason version 3. Logic wasn't quite out yet, and they had no Ableton or anything. So I like learned Pro Tools and Cubase, and I hated both of them. I really enjoyed Reason though, because like Reason was like you had access to all these like synths and sounds, and it's kind of cool how it works, how you can like patch things together. And I always found that really interesting. But then a friend of mine turned me on to Ableton. He was like, dude, you got to check this out. Like a bunch of like DJs and people are using this. So I like checked that out, and I like fell in love like instantly. Like my first memory was like pulling this like pulling a piece of an Imaging Heap song, and then this like very obscure band that only put out one album called Blast Furnace. And I think the album's actually on Spotify, and it's really great. It's like this weird, like psychedelic, like 70s rock stuff. But I like pulled a piece from that, before I even got into Ableton, for some reason I bought mixed in key because like one of a paper we had to write for one of our music classes was like, like come up with a business idea, that would involve music. And I was like, oh, well, I could like DJ, but play like indie music, mix all this stuff. But I had no idea how to DJ, and I wouldn't DJ for like 2 or 3 years like after that. But for some reason I bought mixed in key at that time because I was like, this is so cool. I can find out the key of all this music. And then getting Ableton, I was just like, wow, I can now make these like mashups of stuff. And I just found that like so fascinating. So that kind of started the whole Ableton thing. I finished school, came out with like $80,000 of student loan debt.
That's always fun.
Oh, it was terrible. And I deferred that like as long as I could. I think it was like 2 years or something. And I was in a band during college, and then kind of picked up DJing a little bit. Like with Ableton, I had some really good friends who have been DJing like forever. So they kind of like showed me a few things. And then at the same time getting into Ableton. But then when I got out of college, it was like, okay, you either go to LA, New York, or like Nashville was like kind of a little bit of a scene. I was like, well, I don't want to go to New York yet, and I don't want to go to LA yet because I don't feel like I'm ready. Mm-hmm. And I had some friends that lived in Nashville. So I was like, oh, I'll go to Nashville. Like that'll be great. And I lived in Nashville for I think like 2 years, like never had a real job.
And how long ago was this that you were doing that?
I would have been in Nashville around 2009-ish.
Okay. Yeah, it's been a minute. It's been a
while. But I played in like a few country groups there, like played bass. Because like after guitar, I got like a key, like this old Casio, like little keyboard piano thing, and like wanted to learn how to play keys. Moral of the story is that I basically got into like all these other instruments, like playing bass and keyboards and all that, because I'm kind of like, my brain's a little crazy where I want to like learn how to do like a bunch of different things and not necessarily be good at any particular thing.
Same.
But Ableton has kind of been that glue that has allowed me to actually, like use what little talent I have in terms of like being an instrumentalist and actually piece things together and have something to present. So did gigs in Nashville, never really got paid or anything. And then eventually like moved back in with my parents, which was terrible. Not like terrible. That sounds like so harsh.
Yeah, but living with your parents is not everybody's dream. I mean,
like, especially after like going to college, which is like all they wanted me to do. And then I like come back. I'm like, I don't.
Still here.
Still here. I have no job. Like know how to do things, but.
Yeah. I have a similar story. I did a very similar thing.
Yeah, it's tough. Because like the school that I went to was basically like engineering school. So like we learned how to like work with tape, learned all the studio stuff. But then when you get out of college, the quote unquote job services that they have, like, I got out of school and I was like, hey, like, what jobs are there? And they're like, well, sorry, we don't really have anything. I was like, okay, great. Like, I wish I would have known this like before I started. Could have bought a lot of gear with that money.
Right. Yeah.
But it was a good lesson of just like knowing that like if you want to like do something or have a specific job, it's like you got to kind of do it on your own, and no one's going to give you a break like unless you have something to show that like incentivizes them to give you a break. So to kind of wrap up the backstory, moved back in with my parents, ended up getting a job at the warehouse at Sweetwater, which is based in Fort Wayne, which is an amazing company, to eventually get a job in the store because they do have a small storefront there. Mm-hmm. And then worked in the store for probably like 6 months. And then I was just like, I could stay here, have the 401k, like have health insurance, all that. And I remember talking to one of the guys that I worked with there, who he must have been like in his 40s at the time. And I was like, man, I don't know. I'm thinking about going to LA. And he just like looked at me with like the sternest eyes, was like, do it. He's like, go now. You're young. Do it. He's like, get out of here. And I was like, okay, man. Like,
all right.
Yeah. Okay. So then I ended up, when I was living back with my parents, I ended up getting certified through Ableton because at that point I had just spent so much time with it and was like, I mean, it was an obsession. Still is a little bit of an obsession.
What version did you get certified in?
I think it was 7 or right when 8 was coming out.
Nice.
So yeah, I got certified and then moved to LA because I had a friend who lived out there who let me stay with him. And then just like put up Craigslist ads to go do lessons. And the first person that I taught lessons to, it was so weird because I basically offered like lessons. It was like $50 an hour, but then I would drive to the person, which is like crazy in LA because it's just like terrible to get around. And I had this old, it was like a 2000 Buick Regal that was like a hunk of junk that I drove all the way to LA, mind you.
That's awesome. And you made it, so that's good.
Yeah, and I made it. And the first person that I taught lessons to, he was like, come over here. It's like my dad's studio. And I get to the place, like we go inside, like the main room of the studio is just like incredible. It's like beautiful, like looks like it was like built in the 70s, just like pristine studio. And
nice.
Start teaching this guy. He's a really, really smart kid. And probably like halfway through the lesson, he was like, you know who my dad is, right? I'm like, no. He's like, well, the song Let's Get It On by Marvin Gaye? I was like, yeah. He's like, you know that guitar at the beginning, the wow, wow, wow? He's like, that's my dad.
Nice.
That was recorded. I think he said that was recorded in that studio. I don't know, but like,
that's cool.
That just like blew my mind. So being in LA, it gave me like, I was able to make enough money from doing lessons that I could spend time like working on music and doing my own thing as opposed to like working for other people. And I just started putting stuff up on SoundCloud and eventually things started to happen.
It's cool, man. You could have just started a moving company. You're probably really good at it by now. Honestly.
I do know how to pack a van or a truck. I will tell you that.
No, I'm sure you're amazing at Tetris, I'm sure, or something like that. So right now, you obviously have made a pretty strong staple in the electro funk. Is that what you would maybe classify your genre, whatever a genre is anymore?
Funk, something. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I'm all about the funk. But you've done some really cool stuff and great collabs with a lot of artists that I follow. And so I'd love to pick your brain on like your music production process, because I think you're really great at sound design. Like your mixes are really clean. I love the style and the things that you're doing. Maybe we can just nerd out a little bit and talk about some of your process in the studio, what you do.
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, thank you. Sort of like the secret sauce, and this ties into working at Sweetwater. So when I worked at Sweetwater, for employees, like there's a lot of perks for working there, which is why a lot of people stay there. And that was one of the hardest things to like leave, is you get to like just check out so much gear. There's like an actual gear library where you can like, pull like 2 items and like keep them for a week.
That's nice. It's so nice.
It's insane. So when I worked there, I got one of I think it was like the first UAD satellite, like Firewire box. Cause like before they were doing like the chips that you would actually like install in the old like Mac Pros. But then they started doing these satellites. So I got one of those. And because I worked at Sweetwater, they gave us, like if you bought one, you basically got an NFR for every single plugin, which basically means an NFR is like a not for resale. So like, I mean, I know you know what that means, but people might not know what that means. So basically you get this license for all of their plugins, which is literally 30 grand worth of plugins and the best plugins ever made.
That's wild.
And so they give you the NFR, like basically it's like a year NFR. And then at the end of the term, like if you're still working there, then they like re-up it. So like when I went out to LA, I still had, maybe like half a year left on it. And I feel like that's when my production really started to at least sound pretty good in terms of like the frequency spectrum, getting the bass right and all that. Was just being able to use some of those UAD plugins. But then the NFR ran out and I had emailed the company. I was like, hey, like I don't really work there anymore, but like, is there anything we can do? And they're like, no, like nothing that we can do. So then I had to start like buying the plugins.
They told me the same thing. Yeah.
Sucks, man. I mean, it sucks, but also like the plugins are so good that I don't mind spending money on them because like it's stuff that I still use to this day. And in terms of like VSTs and plugins, like what I use is basically all, it's like UAD, Soothe, Ozone, and that's kind of it. Somehow here and there.
Yeah, Oic Sound, who makes Soothe, they sponsored the podcast a few times. It's a great company, man.
Yeah,
they're awesome.
That's like such a lifesaver.
Really is.
When I was finishing my last album, Galaxies Within Us, I got Soothe like when I was close to the end of it, of making the album. And one thing I've always struggled with is like getting the high end of a song to sound bright without being too much. And I feel like I kind of always overdo it. But since having Soothe, like that just helps so much to be able to clean stuff up and make it not so whistly, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, things can get real piercing in that like 3K ish area, right? Sometimes, or to 6K ish. And yeah, Soothe is awesome. That multi-band dynamic EQ, whatever you want to call it. The thing's really, really cool. There's a lot of toys out there as far as like producing music anymore. You know, I love using, before Soothe, I was using like a FabFilter DS, their Pro DS, to kind of use some of that de-essing and that brighter frequency range to kind of tame some of that harshness. But now Soothe is just kind of my thing. Like,
yeah, I mean, you just throw it on there and just like mess with the big knob, and it's better.
Feels like cheating, but I'm into it.
It works.
It does. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit some of other toys you're using as far as producing. And I don't know if you got the questions I sent over earlier. Maybe we can fire through some of your favorite tools and some of your favorite toys using Ableton Live and plugins, and like just kind of go through a couple categories and just maybe talk about some of the ways you're using them.
Sure.
Awesome. So as far as like your delay and reverb, what are like your main go-tos?
Reverb, the Lexicon 224 by UAD, or the EMT 250, which I don't use the 250 as much now because it's good for certain things, but I've been using the EMT 140 a lot more, which is like a plate, reverb. And I feel like that it's a lot softer. It sounds really good on drums too. As far as delay, sometimes like the EP 33 by UAD, which is like a tape delay. That's pretty great. Ableton's built in the echo effect though in Ableton. I feel like I use that like a lot. If I just want like a simple delay, because that sounds pretty good and it's super easy to use.
Oh yeah. Do you play much with like the modulation tab in that as well? I love that. That's my favorite thing.
Yeah, I just stumbled upon there's one of the presets in there that's called a bit tipsy that does some pretty cool, like it's a very like intense delay, but it's really nice like on a return channel and kind of turned down to like throw some stuff to, and there's a lot of modulation happening on it, so just turning some of that stuff down adds a really nice delay.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll have to try that preset. What about as far as, so that was talking a little bit about reverbs and the little delay. Any other delays that you've used?
You should know that at the tail end of last year, or kind of, well, I guess like the middle of last year, I got bit by the modular bug.
I saw that on your socials. Yeah.
That's kind of been my life for the last year. So speaking of delays, Strymon makes this thing called the Magneto, which is like a 4-head tape delay that is just like insane. It's a great regular delay, but there's like this shift mode on it, which basically pitches all 4 of the tape heads into a key, and you can like set that to be whatever, which really adds some like, it does some like crazy stuff. And it's a digital device too, but you wouldn't think it. Like it sounds amazing. There's a spring reverb built into it, and you can do some like tape emulation stuff on it too, because it has like a wow and flutter and like a tape degradation knob on it. But that thing's super fun.
That sounds awesome. Is this what it looks like? Is it this thing right here?
That's it.
Yeah. No, man, the modular bug has been slowly biting me recently too. And I'm just like, there's so many great synthesis tools I use in the box, but there could be a debate for hours about analog versus digital emulations. But dude, it's just, for me, analog, it's just always going to be its own thing. It always sounds different to me. Just that rich fatness.
The biggest thing for me, like outside of like sound quality, is just the act of touching a knob and it doing something is like so great. Like that's just such a good feeling. Then I think what modular can give you is like, and talking to like with my students and everything, because I teach Ableton as well. And like, I feel like a lot of people with just the way modern production happens nowadays, and like with all the sample packs and everything, I feel like people struggle finding their own identity in music because so many people are just using like splice loops and whatnot. And like at the end of the day, if you're just dragging in splice loops and then bouncing out a song, it's like you're not going to feel that great about it, like that proud.
Yeah.
Like deep down. So I think with modular and like outboard stuff, it can actually give you like a true sense of identity. Like when you make a sound or something, it's like, this is like, nobody has made this sound. Like it might sound similar to some things, but you like made this sound. And it's kind of like working in the woodshed or something, of like making a sculpture. Like you're actually physically doing things.
Yeah.
And there's no undo button, which I think is a beautiful thing. Like the only undo button is like ripping out all the cables,
starting over.
Which is great too. Like that's a super satisfying thing. Like after building a big patch and recording it, then just like pulling out all those cables and be like, well, if I didn't write it down on how I got that sound, like it's gone forever.
Yeah, exactly. And do you ever save, like, say you come up with a really dope sound, you're like, I never want to lose this. Do you ever just like record a long clip of that and then put it in a sampler to save later in your presets?
I did that when I first got into, like when I first started getting modules, because like every sound that I was like making just felt like so spiritual. And I was like, oh, I'm going to record all this. But then it gets to a point where it's like you can record whatever 10 minutes of a patch, but then it's like, well, what are you going to do with it? Like, are you going to chop it up? Like, and when are you going to spend the time doing that? And for me, I don't know. I try to work so in the moment that I don't want to go like back to things. Like I'd rather, if I have a cool sound going, I'll record it in. And especially now with Ableton 11's take lanes, like it's such a game changer, because you can just have one patch, set a small loop, and then do, you know, a bunch of like modulation changes, and then sort of clip that together to make like a new little sequence, or, you know, a new little loop. So I just try to make it useful, because it's like if I'm just recording, you know, like 15 minutes of something, like either that has to be the song and that's how it is, or I'm going to have to go back and like cut up all this stuff, figure out how to like repurpose it or save it for later, which then, I don't know, doesn't always work for me. So I just try to record on the spot, get the sound out, and then make something out of it. Because that's, when I got into the modular, I was kind of at a crossroads with Ableton where I was like, I'm so sick of like using the computer and like doing all this stuff. And I was like, oh, I'm going to do everything in modular. And a very specific thing happened. I got so I think it's from Tip Top Audio. They make a 909 kick module. I was like, all right, I got my kick. Like, I'm good. I'll be fine. I'll be able to do all this in modular. And then once I got that module in, I was like, oh, like I'm stuck with the same kick drum like for everything. And like, that's just like not how it works. So it took me a long time to like figure out, it's like, okay, certain things are going to be way better to do in modular, and then certain things are going to be way better to do like in the box. And the stuff in the box usually comes down to like editing or like actually arranging and like doing like the entire song. So I feel like I'm in a good place now where I'm able to kind of use best of both worlds, and it's allowed me to finish a lot more things, because like I'm not again, without having that undo function in terms of audio, you record it in, and either you use it or you delete it.
Yeah. I find like with my students and even myself, sometimes having commitment issues as a producer is like a real struggle. And, it really is like, well, if I freeze and flatten it, there it is, or if I'm using modular and I just recorded that sound, there it is, but that's like you were saying, that's you probably just force yourself to commit and like doing more of the workflow you just mentioned to keep moving forward to actually finish something and move on.
Yeah. The way I describe it to people is like, you look at Ableton or any, even Pro Tools, anything like that, any digital audio workstation that we have nowadays. And it's essentially, it's kind of like being stranded out in the middle of the ocean because you have all these options, limitless opportunities to do whatever. But if you're stranded out in the middle of the ocean, you have no idea which way to go because you can't see land or anything. So I try to like tell people, it's like you basically need to build your sandbox, and you need to build something with walls that's going to keep you limited in a way to be able to finish things. And the sandbox is yours. You can build it however you want, but you need to, put limitations on yourself so you can actually finish something. Otherwise you're going to drown. Like you're just going to be stuck. You're going to be hitting the undo. You're going to be switching serum patches and you're never going to finish anything. So it kind of takes a lot of self-will to actually put limitations on yourself with the mass of tools and sounds that we have. But if you can do that, it'll make it like a lot easier to finish things.
Yeah, makes sense. That like whole analysis paralysis mentality. You just keep too many options, information overload, whatever you want to call it. Struggles can be real. That's why maybe not everybody's a producer. It's a lot of hard work, really, to get to the places, especially as long as you've been doing it.
And it's mostly mental too. I mean, even with my students, that's what I find. It's like you kind of have to like wrangle your own like ego and also your own energy and get out of your own way, because that's the only thing that's holding anybody back. And like once you figure that out and can figure out how to like work with your own personality to like get the most out of what you're good at, then you'll be golden. But it's like you kind of have to hit that wall a few times to overcome it. Yeah.
And there's a lot of vulnerability in that too. Like when you create something, you just release it in the social world, all your friends and people to judge it. Starting out, that's really hard for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I like to tell people too that like, because especially younger people now, it's like with how crazy social media is, like everybody's thinking about like when the song is released and like that's going to be like when you get the payoff or like the satisfaction of doing something. And I try to steer people in the way of like no, like the act of you making the song, like when you're making the song, like that's going to be the best time with that track. Like, I mean, you might get shows like afterwards and there might be a lot of amazing things happen afterwards. But if you're focused on that stuff while you're working on the song, then you're not paying attention to what you're actually doing. And I think that that's the real magic part of like when you're making something and creating something. It's like you need to be like conscious when that's happening, because that's it. Like that's like the most beautiful thing about making music is like you're creating this sonic world, and you need to be able to enjoy that part. And if you enjoy that part, other people are going to hear that. Hear that in the music, and you don't need to worry about everything that happens after that, because it's most of that stuff's out of your control anyways.
That's really good wisdom. That's very true. I find forcing myself to be more present in the moment while I'm creating and enjoying that process, people definitely sense the vibe after in the final product that I'm putting out into the world, at a show or whatever that you're having in that moment.
Yeah, I've always felt like, and I don't have proof for this, but I feel like there's, like when you're making a song, it's almost like you're almost like recording like the feeling that you have like while you're doing it. And that's like this sort of like underlying thing that like when someone listens to this song, if somebody is like whatever you want to talk about, tuning into like certain frequencies or something of like the spiritual world or whatever, like it connects with people who like like understand, even if they don't understand on a conscious level, more like an unconscious level. But I feel like there's something being like transcoded into music, like while you're doing it, that then the listener can feel whether they're aware of it or not.
Yeah. Like even from a physiological standpoint too. Like if you're standing in front of a subwoofer at a giant show and you got all that air just blowing at you, all those frequencies, and you're like, man, I felt that music. Well, you like physiologically did. Like your cells are like moving, like your body physical makeup is being altered in that moment. You know, if you break down like the smallest forms of our bodies, a lot of it is condensed sound waves. So that's an interesting thought. Yeah.
Yeah, we think it's kind of along the lines of like resonance then, because like you're literally, your body is resonating, like literally like resonating, which is basically where you have a frequency, you know, that is like even today we were at a Goodwill and we bought this like flower pot and I was like holding it up to my ear and then like making sound, and you could hear like when you hit certain frequencies, it would like resonate in the bowl and then it would be like louder. So I think that happens almost like on a subconscious level with certain songs where it's like you just like feel it and it just like hits your body in the right way and your body like physically resonates with that sound or that song.
Yeah, I'm not a scientist, but that thought just blows my mind. Like it's pretty cool. Well, like maybe we could finish a couple of these other go-to plugins and devices. Like I could talk literally about that all day though, just like the whole mental side of producing, because I feel like that's so important. And even like you said, a lot of time it's overlooked. You know, people, when they start producing music, there's all these expectations of I'm just going to be able to do all these things. Analysis paralysis kicks in. You can get discouraged.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you have to fail to be successful, really. So
I'd say it's a necessity to fail to be successful, because if you're not failing, you're not moving forward, most likely, because like you don't really know what you need to do what you want to do. So with that, like you need to fail along the way. And usually I like to talk to people about like if they regret anything, because my perspective on like regretting anything is like I'll decide if I regret anything like when I'm dead, because until then I can't see the full picture of what's happened, because I can't tell you how many times something terrible has happened to me, which has then influenced me to take another direction or get to something else that like it all makes sense. Like at the end of the day, you know, like with enough time, like, you know, you have enough time to like retrospect on things. That's something that, yeah, like I think with how public everybody's lives are with social media, it's like people don't want to fail, but you have to. And if you're not afraid of that, then nothing's going to stop you from doing what you need to do, because like you're not going to stop.
Yeah.
Like, some people fail and they stop and that's it. But like you can always keep going.
Yeah. No, I've failed many times, and hopefully it's not on stage, because that's happened before.
That can be fun though too, because it could be a memory for people in the crowd, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I remember that time. Remember like that shit like fucked up, and then back, and it was awesome, man."
Yeah,
just never know.
That's true, and I think how you react is a big part of that too. Like if it does happen on stage, people are just watching. It's like, oh no, is he gonna be upset and pissed, or like is he just gonna laugh it off and move on? You know, that setting that vibe for that audience too.
Yeah, just to tie up on that, one of my students, we've been talking a lot about DJing recently, and I've been kind of just showing her some like tricks and like mixing techniques. And yesterday I was telling her, I'm like, you know, this is something that no other DJ is probably going to tell you, but there's something to be said about pretending like something is fucked up on stage and like just cutting the music and like acting like you don't know what's going on. You let the crowd kind of get riled up and then you bring the music back. Like that is a very powerful like DJ tool to use on stage to like I mean, I've done that a couple times before, just like because it's happened so many times where it's not been planned.
Yeah.
And if you get the music back on, like people are so stoked.
Yeah, that's funny. That's hilarious. Especially if it's in like, I guess, a smaller venue where people can really see your reaction in that moment. That'd be hilarious. definitely keeps people's attention.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you need to do that. Sometimes you need to like clear the palette. You know, just drop everything, be like, I don't know what's going on. It's like, oh shit, that's right. I turned the volume down. Woo!
Oh, that's amazing. Probably my most embarrassing moment on stage was when I threw a drumstick into the crowd, but not like any sane drummer would normally just softly toss it. Like I threw it really hard because I was so excited, and there was a big crowd. It was a lot of energy. My first big show years ago, hit some girl in the face. She just went down, dude. She just flopped, like just fell right over. And all of her girly friends around her were like, oh my God. Like,
how did you do that?
And the bass player just stopped playing for like 5 seconds and just like looks at me like, what did you just do? Like, it was not my proudest moment, but it was a great memory now. And the band and the manager afterwards, like, dude, you're going to be touring through Ohio someday. You're going to stop to get snacks, and that girl's going to find you, and she's going to come up and just like punch you in the face. So, it was you. Shove an eye patch or something. No.
Yeah. I was thinking yesterday when I was talking to my student about, she was asking me about like my favorite shows that I've played and whatnot. And I was like, it tends to be that the worst shows and the worst experiences are the most memorable.
Yeah.
And it's like, I could think of 1,000 like horrible shows or horrible things that happened, but like a really good show, like I know I've played them, but it's like they're just not as memorable. And that's like kind of a weird thing about doing music or doing any sort of like performance, is that the memories tend to be like the really terrible things. But eventually, again, with enough time, like you can really laugh at that stuff, and it becomes like, I don't know, it becomes some of my favorite memories, honestly.
Yeah.
The worst things that ever happened.
Yeah. When you're playing enough shows like that makes sense. Yeah. Also, I apologize if you hear that really loud sound. It's just a bunch of geese outside my place screaming. This happens every episode. There's so many of them. I'm outnumbered here. It's a crazy thing. I'm actually releasing a goose sample pack soon. I was talking to Compressor and Jonathan Stein about that in the recent episode. So I'll send you the pack when it's done too, if you want it. Yeah.
Can't wait to hear that goose step.
Yeah, some goose step. Yeah, it's great. Hey, you wanted to take this time real quick to remind you to check out Audience interfaces. I mentioned earlier their ID14 MKII and the ID4. They deliver a lot of really awesome studio recordings with their Audient Console Mic Preamps. They have really great converters. If you're in the market for getting a new audio interface, definitely check out Audient. Just go to audient.com, audient.com/AMP podcasts and look them up. Also, big thanks to Melodics for supporting this episode as well. They make that really cool desktop app. It's a great way to grow your skills. Plug in almost any MIDI controller. It's great for finger drumming and playing scales on the push, as well as my MIDI keyboard. I also play drums. They have an electronic drum kit, lesson variety, so you can grow your skills that way as well. Check that out. Go to melodics.com, melodics.com, and use the discount code LPO-20 to save 20%, or check out the free trial. And back to today's episode. Thanks for listening, everyone. Let's maybe go back to some of the Ableton's devices and plugins and stuff. We can maybe nerd out on that if you're cool with it.
Yeah.
As far as like mixing tools, maybe compressors, EQs, what are maybe some of your go-tos or workflows?
As far as workflow, people have probably heard me talk about this before, but in terms of like sidechain compression, because I feel like there's a lot of debate on how to sidechain properly, whatnot. But what I do is I have a Ghost sidechain channel that has a 707 kick sample, which is like one of the samples that came with like Ableton 7 or something. It's like been in Ableton forever.
Yeah.
And that sample is always my Ghost sidechain sample, and it's been the same sample for 10 plus years. And the reason I do that, as opposed to sidechaining to the actual kick drum or using a different sample every time, is that if you know what sample you're sidechaining to, and if you know it really well, then the compressor settings, like I can basically gauge, depending on what tempo I'm at, like what the release time needs to be without even like listening to it, because I've been using the same sample, which is nice. And then I sidechain on every group and then on return channels as well, as opposed to doing it all on one. Like, because I know some people do that too, where it's like you'll group all your synths and everything, the bass, in one big group, and then just do one sidechain compressor on that. But I like to do it sort of in little bits, like on, the bass will have one sidechain compressor, it's like the synths have one, and then just do slightly different settings on each one of those sidechain compressors to sort of like, I think in certain music, it's probably good to just have like one, like if you're trying to really like accentuate like the transients of your kick drum and like you want it to be very like kind of robotic, but I like to kind of smooth out some of those, like some of the ducking, if you will.
Yeah.
So that's like a big thing in terms of like compressors. One thing that I do, and I've been doing this for a long time, is like I use the UAD Fatso Junior, and I put that on a return channel. It's like the settings are cranked pretty high up, have a high pass filter before it, sidechain compressor after it, and I basically send everything in the mix to that and then turn the volume of that return channel down a little bit. And it kind of just, it's kind of like, like parallel compression or parallel saturation. And
you send everything to that?
Just about everything.
Okay.
And just kind of bring that up into the mix where, like, when you turn it off, you can tell that something's not there, but when you turn it on, it's not like you don't have this huge volume spike. But that helps, to me at least, that helps bring out some of like the mid high frequencies and sort of allows you to get some of this saturation and kind of fill up the mix without having to like soak something in saturation and whatnot.
Yeah, I know a lot of bass producers like Ahi and Skrillex and those dudes do some similar things with some like crazy parallel limiting on multiple groups or sending it to return tracks like that. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's nice because it gives you another layer of what you already have with like a little bit of a different flavor, and it might be more distorted, but then you're still hearing the dry signal.
Yeah.
And that sounds fine and everything. And then especially if you're side chaining it, it's like one of those things you don't hear, but then if you turn it off, you notice that it's not there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great tip, man. That's a good trick. And I'm sure everybody listening right now is writing that down as well if they haven't been doing anything like that.
Just get the UAD stuff. That's it.
Yeah.
That's a trick.
Yeah. No, they make great plugins. UAD fam. I love their plugins. So as far as other like maybe actual specific devices, you mentioned the Fatso Junior.
Yeah, I use that on a lot of stuff. The actually the Moog filter as well. I'll use that on quite a bit of stuff because it cuts off at like 12K, which is kind of nice just to roll off the top end of some stuff. And then the drive on that thing is just like incredible. So just to like, instead of compressing something, I'll just maybe throw that on, turn up a little bit of the drive.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause saturation, like, and this is something I really just learned more of like on a deeper level the last couple of years, but like saturation essentially is compressing a sound. If you're saturating something, you're distorting it. You're like really bringing those frequencies, like you're distorting them, you're bringing them more at a unison level. Yeah. Yeah.
You're kind of like crispening them.
Yeah.
It's sort of like toasting your bread.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Putting this nice little, you're just making it better. Like usually if you're doing saturation the right way, it's like you're just making what's there, better.
Some really good crispy toast, and like the filters, like the butter on top, you just kind of smooths it out.
Yeah, smooths it out.
Yeah.
It's like you still have the crunch, but then you still get like the
flavor of the filter. Yeah. It's nice. It's nice.
Another thing I do as far as like sub bass is use what used to be called the hip hop sub, now in Ableton, and it's called the simple
sine sub.
Simple sine sub, I think.
I believe that's right. I just played with it the other day. I should know this.
Yeah, so I tend to use that, especially more like electronic stuff. I've been recording a lot of live bass recently, so I haven't been using it as much, but I'll use that because using the same thing, like especially for like my sidechain compressor trigger or like the sub bass, like these sort of like boring things that are never like the star of the show, like using the same thing then allows me to like dial it in the way it needs to be and have consistency across several mixes.
Yeah.
Especially with subs, like, you know, I had, when I was using Serum, like I would try to use like the direct sub out and like could never get it to sound like as good as just using like the hip hop sub. So
yeah, maybe you can talk about, if you don't mind, some of the ways you treat that sub.
Yeah, well, that was what I was going to say, is that another plugin that I use quite a bit, especially with live bass now, because it helps, but it's the Little Labs Voice of God from UA.
Yeah, dude. That
So
thing is so fat, dude. And it's two little knobs. It's so
perfect.
It's crazy.
It's perfect.
And I use that and I dial it in on my sub bass and I can really feel it. I mean, you can't really hear true sub. You know, like you don't really hear down there. So being able to dial in the VOG on a sub pack, dude, it's game over.
Forget about it.
Forget about it.
Yeah, so that's really great. Another, like a built-in plugin that I love is the drum bus in Ableton, which I find is just so useful. That's usually on all my drum groups, but then sometimes I use that on like more like plucky basses because you have like the little transient designer built into it.
Yeah.
Which is really great for that. I mean, it's got a pretty good saturator in it. And then also just being able to kind of crush the signal and then turn that filter, because it has like the low pass filter that goes up to like 20K, that you kind of like bring that down to sort of dial in some of those higher frequencies as you like kind of hyper saturate it. But that's a really fun, like built-in plugin that I feel like is so great. Yeah.
And a lot of the tracks you produce, I mean, like I said, your mixes sound great, man. And what are some, I guess, additional ways that you treat like maybe the top end of your bass? Like I've played with like using like a vocoder just to kind of get that like harmonic tone out of the top of the bass, you know, which is funny because like bass music is a genre, right? But like it's really not just the bass. It's like the actual tonality, overtones you're bringing out of that bass sound that people actually hear and love.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I tend to do, this isn't just related to treating like bass stuff, but basically I'll high pass everything that's not the kick drum and the sub bass, like to some level, cutting out the low end. And this is one thing, like if you're using a lot of splice loops, specifically like hi-hats and claps and stuff, for some reason, there's so much freaking garbage in the low end. So like in my template, I think every single channel like has an EQ8 that's like cutting out at like 200 or 250 hertz. So I do a lot of that. And then to go back to the Moog filter, like a lot of times that will be, at least on bass stuff, that could be like at the end of the chain. And then I have like an EQ, and like kind of, because if you're saturating stuff again or distorting stuff, like it's bringing all that information like up and crunching it. So I like to either just EQ before that and sort of cut out some of like the peaks, so then you can kind of get more out of, kind of distort it more because you're kind of leveling out the frequencies before it gets to that. So I'll do that, but then also using like Ableton's built-in multi-band compressor. And the beautiful thing about that, the multi-band compressor, is you have that dry wet knob. And so sometimes I'll line up like 5 multi-band compressors, or I even have a rack where it's like 5 or 10 multi-band compressors. And then you just turn down the dry and wet to where you're able to get enough of that. Again, that's like parallel compression, right? So you're getting the dry signal, but then you're kind of saturating and sort of like OTTing stuff, but you're not like doing it all in one fell swoop. Like you're kind of just dialing it in to where you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, definitely. That OTT life. Yeah, it's a good preset or a great device when you have other companies making plugins after that preset.
Yeah. That, and then another thing, I feel like not a lot of people use any sort of like flanging in their music, but I love specifically, again, the UAD MXR flanger, which changed when I heard it, because I was like, oh, this is what like a flanger is supposed to sound like. I always thought flangers sounded like shit. But having that, and then with any top end stuff, like even some synths, I'll have that, but just like turn the dry and wet like way down so you get a little bit of modulation. And then specifically with like hi-hat loops or any sort of loop thing, I'll usually have a flanger on it, and again turn the dry and wet down, because like if you're having something that is repeating and it's kind of stagnant, like your brain wants some sort of change or modulation, and with just a little bit of flanger you can get that to where it like changes the sound. It's not necessarily noticeable, but if it's not there, it's noticeable.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I started playing with that flanger in demo mode like, I don't know, a couple months ago, and I was like, damn, I need to use this more often. And then I never did, but I need to.
Yeah, it's great. That and the CE1, which is like the Roland / Boss chorus. It's like a chorus vibrato. That's pretty nice too. Especially I might put that on like if I have something that's like in mono, but I want it to like, again, just have a little bit of like modulation so it's not so stagnant.
Yeah. Yeah. And the chorus flanger, I've really fallen in love with that with Live 11 as well, because they married the chorus and the flanger together. Mm-hmm. I think that thing has some really cool results.
Yeah. And the, what is like the spectral
resonator?
Not the resonator, but the other spectral one. It's like reverb. Or is that it might be the resonator.
There is the spectral resonator. There's spectral blur and spectral time.
The spectral time. That's, yeah. I've been playing around with that a little bit too, and that's really cool.
I haven't played with that a whole lot. What have you used it for?
I was working on this like sort of dark techno-ish like thing, and I recorded some like weird like pitch down like vocals, and then I used the spectral time because it's kind of like a reverb delay sort of, which it might, I don't know if it's doing something like granular or something like that, but using that on the vocals and kind of using that to like pumping up the dry and wet as it was getting close to like the drop, and then messing with like the time and the feedback to kind of create like basically like a riser, out of like the vocals.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'm gonna have to mess with that some more. Spectral time sounds dope.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. That's a good insight into some of your effects and things. Knowing that you've been in the game for a long time, playing a lot of shows. By the way, I just saw like tickets were sold out for Red Rocks, I think.
Yeah, like sold out in like 2 minutes.
Yeah, dude. Congrats. That's awesome. That's huge. I love Red Rocks. It's one of my favorite venues for sure. Place is amazing. And you've played there once or twice before?
I think this will be my 5th or 6th.
Oh, is it really? Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize there's that many.
Insane. I don't know.
That's cool.
Why that's a thing, but
that's dope, man. Yeah, I'll try to make it if I can. I love Denver. But anyway, yeah. So I guess knowing you've been doing this for a while, if you could give yourself advice as a producer wanting to make a full-time music career, say 5 or 6 years ago, even, like what advice would you time travel to tell yourself?
I would, maybe the best advice would be like to know that you're just going to keep going, and that there's no like proverbial finish line, and to enjoy the process, which sounds so cliche, but I feel like it's so true, because like that's, at the end of the day, that's kind of all you have is like the process of like making the music, and then whatever happens after that is kind of out of your control. Mm-hmm. A big insight that I had at the end of last year, which is what led me into getting into modular, is like, because I was like really just kind of frustrated with my workflow, and I was like, man, I don't know if I want to do music anymore. But then I had this light bulb went off where I was like, however I'm choosing to make music, whatever the workflow is, however I'm doing it, whatever I'm doing it with, is just one way to make music. And there's literally like infinite numbers of ways to like approach music and to make it, especially with all the tools that we have. So to keep that in mind, that it's like you don't need to just be doing the same thing over and over in terms of your workflow. Like there's other ways, to do it and to incorporate different things into it. And then other than that, I quit drinking, which it'll be 2 years in October. And that's been a pretty good mood stabilizer, because I kind of like most people who are in the music industry kind of just struggle with depression and whatnot. It's like to throw alcohol on that is like kind of the worst idea ever.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to figure that out.
Yeah.
But I'd say the most important thing is to, I mean, this sounds weird, but like to get sunlight. Like that's been the biggest part of my journey in the last like 5 years. And that's part of why I had moved back to Florida, because you like the vitamin D there is like insane. Like basically the closer you get to the equator, the more vitamin D you're able to sort of generate, because like, as you know, like there's a certain latitude that like once you go above it, like there's basically the sun doesn't get over the atmosphere high enough or something. I sound like an idiot as I'm saying this.
No, it's cool.
I'm not a scientist, but basically the sun doesn't get up high enough to where you can like generate vitamin D because it comes from like UVA or UVB light. So like the last 5 years, I've been making it a point to get outside every day, and then also just seeing the sunrise every morning, like being outside, getting that morning sun like in your eyes has made such a huge improvement on my life and my health and well-being. And I think the way that I've come to think about like light's role in life is that it's essentially the metronome. And then if your body is not in time with the metronome, then you have to do all this stuff to sort of try to keep things together, to keep your health in order, where it's like the sun has been around since the beginning of time. And up until like 150 years ago, we had no artificial light. And now that we're in an artificially lit world, like, people hear about like how blue screens are like bad for your health and all that stuff. And it's like, it goes so much deeper than what you hear in the news, because essentially, just to kind of give the little bit of science that I do know, is that essentially what's happening, like the reason why getting sunlight in the morning is so good, because that's when there's like there's a lot of blue light in the sunrise. And what that's doing is that's telling your body, okay, it's time to make melatonin, because you actually make melatonin throughout the day. And then once there's the absence of light, then you actually start to you secrete that melatonin, and then that's what helps you fall asleep. So if you're looking at a blue screen, like in the, at night, like before you go to bed, your phone, anything, that's telling your body, okay, it's 12 o'clock. Like it's noon. Like we need to be up. And that's why so many people have trouble sleeping. And especially being a musician, it's like you're out late, you're around a bunch of artificial light. You probably never see the sunrise. If you're outside, you're probably wearing sunglasses or like have your skin covered up. And it's not good.
No, that's true, man. It looks like you have a good amount of sunlight in your room right now. It looks nice. I see some plants. I think you're doing it right.
Yeah.
But you're right, though. Like I've experienced that for myself. Like all that blue light can mess up your sleep cycle, your REM cycle, I guess, as well. But yeah, I read about that as well. It's really interesting. And a lot of people in studios, they all kind of live in bat caves. I feel like a lot of people do.
Well, the other thing too, like, even just like light bulbs, like it's so hard to get light bulbs that aren't LED now. And if you, a good little like trick is if you want to find out if like a light is good or not, like if you have an LED light, just like turn on the light and then, use like the slow-mo video recording, like feature on your phone. And usually if it's not that great of a light bulb, you'll see a flicker. So basically you're in a strobe light then, because that's LEDs, it's light emitting diode. So basically it flashes like however many cycles, like a second. So it's hard. I mean, that's why so many people now are like using like Edison bulbs, like the old school way, because there's no flicker. But then also you can't see in the studio, but I have these red infrared lights that I use. Like if I am in the studio after the sun goes down, which happens very rarely, like I tend to work in the morning or throughout the day and then kind of shut it down like around 5 or 6.
Okay.
But if you use red light after the sun goes down, that doesn't trigger your melatonin or anything. So it's like you can be around red light, because that's what fire essentially is. Like a fire is mostly red light, so it doesn't trigger that melatonin and disrupt your circadian rhythm.
That's so interesting. I have like a changing revolving light system in here too. So you're saying red light in the evening. It's ideal. That's good to know. I'm going to do that now because I'm a nighttime producer kind of guy. So yeah, that's good to know.
I used to be too. And like, I used to never be able to sleep. I used to stay up till like 4 a.m, but now like I wake up 5:30, 6 a.m, make coffee, like go outside, and then I'm literally in bed by like 9 or 9:30.
Yeah. Well, that answers my next question. I was going to ask about how you stay in a good headspace and like producing, but I think you answered a lot of that.
I should mention too, like having not like the way that my personality works, I can't really force myself to do certain tasks or like organize my time in a way where it's like, oh, I'm doing this at that and this at that. Like I have a very like rebellious personality. So even if I'm setting the schedule, I tend to like, procrastinate or whatnot. But for me, just like shutting it down at like 5 or 6, and then I'm not, there's like some sort of a cutoff to it. I feel like helps me a lot. And then also to not like necessarily like worry about what I'm working on when I am working, just showing up and like doing the work, whatever that may be, like just knowing that I'm like putting in, 4 or 5 hours a day, like doesn't really matter what I get done, just as long as like I show up and do it. And I feel like for me, that's like really worked, like as opposed to like focusing like I got to finish like a song a week or, every other day. It's like, no, just like show up, put in the time, clock out, come back the next day.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Definitely. There's times where you don't feel inspired as a producer, but sometimes you just have to force it. You just have to put in the time and do it anyway, because then sometimes that's how inspiration comes. You
have to kind of like create your own inspiration, like, which was a hard thing for me to figure out too, because like everybody has that where they're like, oh, I don't feel inspired. I'll just wait till I'm inspired. It's like, well, it's not going to like show up like unless like you're there putting in the work. And there's a really good book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield that talks a lot about that, about just like putting in the hours and basically cultivating the time for the muse to show up, like as opposed to you waiting to be inspired. Like just have something set in stone, whether it's like you work an hour on Monday, 4 hours Tuesday, whatever, as long as you have like a set up time and a place that you do it, it's like eventually, the muse will come and you'll make something great, but you have to be there for that to happen.
Yeah. Just having some kind of schedule or rhythm has been really helpful for me too. Yeah. Just get into that flow state of work ethic, whatever you want to call it. Well, I want to respect your time. One quick last question, I guess too, but what made you want to become a Ableton certified trainer at the time?
I mean, it seemed like, well, I think at the time I was so deep into Ableton and like deep into using like drum racks and doing all this weird chain stuff with instrument racks. And I think it might've been when I was working at Sweetwater, like the Ableton guys had come into the store, but I was working back in the warehouse. So I kept like trying to like sneak out to like go like see them. But I think they had told me, they're like, yeah, have you thought of like being a certified trainer? I was like, no, like, what is that? They're like, oh yeah, you can like teach lessons and do whatever. There's all these like perks. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. So part of it was that. And then also just like being able to then teach Ableton was like kind of like a job that I could see myself like doing, that still gave me like a lot of freedom and also still pertained to like what I was doing. Cause I think, which I'm sure it's the same for you, but the best thing about teaching lessons, like aside from watching people grow and like helping people, is that like a lot of times you'll come up with new ideas because you're teaching to someone who has a completely different perspective than you. So they see things differently than you see them. And you could be looking at the exact same thing, but they're looking at it from this different angle. And all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, like I had never thought of it.
Yeah.
So like, I feel like I get so much out of it just like on a selfish level, but also like it's actually helping people and they're stoked about it. And it's so cool to see people like grow into their own and to also give them like advice that is actually helpful to them, that they actually want to hear. Cause that's like another thing. Like, I don't know if you've been in this situation where you try to like help someone who clearly doesn't want your help, but like really needs it.
Yeah.
Like that's a really, really bad feeling. So to be in a position where people actually want your help and like actually respond to it is like a very, very powerful feeling to have.
Completely. I feel the same way. And I've learned so much more since I started teaching. I really have stretched me in a lot of ways. Being asked questions I didn't know the answer to maybe initially and be like, I'll get back to you. Kind of thing. Yeah, right. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely rewarding. Have you had any students that have gone on to, do some really cool music that like you're just really proud of or ever collaborated with or anything like that?
I mean, there's a lot of people that are even just like the stuff that some people show me are like, I have a few students who have been with me for almost a year now who were starting from like nothing to now like finishing songs and like having their own sound. And to me, that's like the coolest thing because it's like,
yeah,
like we have to take a step back like every once in a while. I'm like, dude, like remember when we started this and you didn't even know what audio tracks were? Yeah. Like, and then now like look at this, like look at what you're doing. Like,
yeah,
that's so cool. It's amazing.
Oh, that's true. I mean, even for myself, sometimes when I feel like I need some inspiration or I'm discouraged, like I had to go clean up my hard drive and I was listening to stuff I started making 8 years ago. I'm like, damn, Daniel, you came a long way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I tell people too that a lot that like it's important to, well, first it's important to finish things. Because then you actually have something like from the work that you put in, but it's important to bounce stuff out like regularly and then to go back to that because that's like it's almost like a form of journaling. And it's like, especially like you said, that's a perfect example of like if you're feeling super discouraged, like, and if you've been making music long enough and you have that stuff from 8 years ago to like go back to, like go back and listen to that stuff. Like when you feel like you're a shitty producer and you listen to that, you're like, wow. Okay. Like, yeah, there's been some improvements.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. And that's a good feeling. You can that little pat on your back. You're like, okay, I'm doing good things. Keep going.
Yeah. Cause like, you don't know how much gas you have in your tank and you don't know how far that goes to where like, what's going to happen 8 years from now if you stick with it. Mm-hmm. You're listening to the stuff from 16 years ago and the stuff from 8 years ago. And then now you're like, wow. Like I've really come a long way.
This is
like,
true.
There's no limit to that.
Right. Yeah, totally, man. And I'm in a place now where I'm wanting to collaborate with more with other people. I feel like that stretches me a lot too.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure. Just trying to figure out how to like, I mean, almost on a psychological level too, especially if you're working with like a vocalist, like you have to, and not to throw vocalists under the bus, but it's like you got to talk to them in a certain way to kind of get the performance that you want.
Yeah.
And that's the same with like even collaborating with another producer. It's like there's a lot of psychological hurdles you have to kind of like manage to get around in order to get like, the best out of someone and how to talk to them and also how to collab, like how to like step back when it's time to step back and how to jump in, like when it's time to jump in, it's tough to manage all that for sure.
No, that's really true. That's something that's not talked about a lot as a producer is I feel like in the studio, especially like you said, working with vocals, there's been moments where I felt like more of a life coach than I did a producer at the time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Especially, vocals, it's very special because it's like, it's not like if you're bad at guitar or like if your guitar sounds like crap and it's like, well, I just need to change the strings or like, tune it up, get a new guitar. It's like with vocals, it's like, that's you, like that's that person, like that is their soul basically like emanating out in like a vocal form. So it's like you have to, and everybody's different too. So it's like some people you can tell it's like, dude, that fucking sucked. Like you need to like do that again. But other people you have to be like, well, that was like really great, but like let's try something a little different. And like what you mean? Let's try it good this time.
Right. You don't want to crush their soul and make them cry in a studio sesh. It's not going to be a good song. Yeah.
But some people respond to having their soul crushed and they're like, that's what they want. So it's like, you have to know.
Yeah.
You have to know who you're dealing with.
Yeah. That's good advice, man. It's good stuff. Let's close out. Maybe you can share out a couple upcoming projects that you have. Shameless plug for any releases or things that you want people to know about.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have any like scheduled releases at this point, but I've just been finishing like so much stuff over the last few months and stuff that I was working on last year and then trying, that's the weird thing about getting into modular is that I feel like it's taken me a year just to like figure out how to manage all this stuff and like actually make useful sounds. Like there's some really weird stuff that I was like making where it's like, there's no drums It's like very like music concrete, like weird wind sounds with like marimbas, like all like mangled stuff.
That's cool.
Yeah, which is fun. But yeah, I've been working on a bunch of stuff, a bunch of more dancey stuff. I've been really, really, really inspired by Afro house and a lot of that music that's been coming out like over the last few years. So I've been trying to figure out how to like have that influence with still some like funky stuff, but then work the modular in there and some like live bass and stuff.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's all kind of starting to come together. So I don't have any planned releases at this point, but there's a bunch of music that's like kind of ready to go.
Awesome.
So no shameless plugs, unfortunately.
Well, I'm going to include links in the show notes like usual, everyone. So scroll there, follow Kill Paris. Thanks, Corey, for hanging out. It's good chilling with you, man. And yeah, dude, looking forward to upcoming releases and all the goodness you're going to share with the world in the near future. Congratulations on selling out Red Rocks in like 2 minutes or whatever that was. And yeah, for sure. We'll be in touch. And yeah, man.
Sounds good, man. I'll catch you later. Thanks.
Yo, thanks everybody for checking out the podcast. Quick reminder, if you want to grab my free Ableton Live 11 shortcuts, go to liveproducersonline.com/live11 shortcuts and download it for free. Also, you will be subscribed to the newsletter, so you'll receive emails and be the first to know when new podcast episodes come out and other cool stuff. Also, if you want to purchase Ableton Live 11, I'd be glad to hook you up with a discount. Just go to liveproducersonline.com/buyableton. Big thanks to Melodics and Audient for making this episode happen, and I will see all of you next time.